I was adjusting my sister's veil when her future mother-in-law gripped my wrist hard enough to leave marks and whispered 8 words that detonated my entire existence. "We finally found you. You're our stolen daughter." My hand froze midair, the delicate tulle trembling between my fingers. Her breath carried the scent of champagne and desperation, her nails biting into my skin like she was trying to pin me in place before I slipped away again. My name is Harper Morrison. Or at least, that's who I thought I was. 28 years old, event coordinator, meticulous planner, the reliable big sister who could keep a wedding from collapsing even if the world itself was burning. That morning, I had walked into Rosewood Manor with a car packed full of emergency supplies, safety pins, stain remover, extra tights, snacks, prepared for every possible disaster. What I hadn't prepared for was someone telling me my life was never mine to begin with. The words landed like shrapnel, burrowing beneath my ribs and whispering questions I wasn't ready to ask. A stranger was calling me her missing child. And she didn't stop there. Her eyes darted to my collarbone, to the crescent-shaped birthmark I'd always believed was my one-of-a-kind quirk. She said her daughter had the same mark. Emma. The name clung to the air like smoke. I dropped my sister's bouquet. White roses scattered across the marble floor, petals crushed beneath my heels as I staggered back. For one disorienting moment, the mirror behind Victoria Caldwell reflected a version of myself I no longer recognized, a woman staring at proof she didn't know existed. The wedding music had already begun, violins swelling through the walls, guests taking their seats with the expectant hush of a fairy tale about to begin. And here I was, standing in a hallway full of shadows, caught between duty and a reality that threatened to erase everything I believed about myself. Until that moment, I had believed in simple truths. That Frank and Diane Morrison were my parents. That Willow was my sister in every way that mattered. That our life, messy and ordinary and full of laughter, was ours because we had built it together. But sometimes truth waits decades to reveal itself, choosing the most vulnerable moment, like when your sister is about to walk down the aisle in a dress of ivory lace. The thought of telling Willow now was unthinkable. She was radiant, nervous, full of love for the man waiting at the altar. She needed me steady at her side, the way I had always been. But beneath the weight of that veil, beneath the whispers and stares, something was unraveling. I could already feel the tug of threads I hadn't realized were loose, threatening to pull apart the entire fabric of my life. I forced my face into composure, helped Willow straighten her gown, pretended my world hadn't just shifted under my feet. My smile felt brittle, my laughter hollow, but she didn't notice. That was my gift or my curse. I could keep a secret under glass, smile through breaking, steady others while I drowned quietly beneath the surface. But even as I carried her bouquet, even as I followed her steps down the aisle, my thoughts kept circling back to Victoria's whisper. Stolen daughter, Emma. A birthmark that suddenly felt like evidence. Something inside me knew that no amount of denial would make the words disappear. The truth had already slipped inside, rooting itself in the fragile architecture of my identity. And though I tried to hold it back, to focus on Willow's joy and the glow of that June afternoon, I felt it spreading, like a crack in glass, invisible at first, inevitable in the way it would shatter everything. That was the moment my story stopped belonging to the past I thought I knew and began shifting toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. A truth that would follow me through the vows, through the reception, through every carefully orchestrated moment of my sister's wedding, until there was nowhere left to run. The morning had begun like every other wedding day I'd coordinated, except this one wasn't just another event on my calendar. It was my sister's. I pulled into the circular driveway of Rosewood Manor at exactly 7 a.m., the June sun just cresting over the gardens. My car was packed with the kind of emergency supplies that could rival a disaster relief kit. Extra pantyhose, granola bars, safety pins, stain remover, tissues, and a sewing kit that had saved more than one bride from catastrophe. Preparedness was my second skin, the armor I wore into every celebration. Willow flung open the bridal suite door before I could knock. Her hair was in rollers, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder, the word bride embroidered in gold thread across the back. She looked at me with wild eyes, part terror, part joy. My younger sister was always the dreamer, the artist, the one who painted her world in soft hues while I built mine in lists and schedules. Today she looked like both, a little girl clutching hope and a woman about to promise forever. I steadied her with my hands, reminding her of all the times she had doubted herself before only to rise above it. When she laughed, the tension in the room eased. That had always been our rhythm. She spiraled. I anchored. Our parents used to say we were two halves of a whole, perfectly balanced when we were together. Mom entered soon after, already dressed in lavender, clutching a velvet jewelry box with trembling hands. She fastened Grandma Eleanor's pearls around Willow's neck, her smile bright but brittle. I caught the tremor in her fingers, the two quick words, the way her eyes shimmered with tears that didn't seem entirely tied to joy. When she pulled me into a fierce hug, whispering that she loved us more than anything in the world, I laughed it off with a joke. But something in her grip unsettled me. It was as if she feared I might vanish if she let go. All morning, their strangeness lingered. Whispered conversations stopped when I entered a room. Dad's eyes lingered on me at the rehearsal dinner, as though he were memorizing my face. At the time, I dismissed it as nerves, parental emotions running high before their youngest married. Now, with Victoria Caldwell's words clawing at my mind, those moments replayed with sharper edges, details I hadn't questioned beginning to pierce. Still, I buried the unease. I had duties to perform. Willow needed her maid of honor, not a sister unraveling from a stranger's claim. The makeup artist finally arrived, the bridesmaids bustled about, and I busied myself with bouquets and checklists. But I couldn't shake the weight of my mother's hands trembling as they touched Willow's neck, or the quiet sadness that flickered across Dad's face when he thought no one was watching. For a brief stretch, laughter returned. Willow teased me about punching Timothy Crawford in the face years ago for mocking her painted sneakers. Mom smiled, though her eyes remained glassy. Dad told his usual joke about being outnumbered, but never outgunned by his Morrison girls. For a fleeting moment, I believed in the perfection of it. The four of us bound together, a unit forged in love and loyalty. But perfection has a way of hiding cracks until pressure makes them split wide open. As the clock crept toward afternoon, the house filled with movement. Florists adjusting centerpieces, photographers directing poses, waiters carrying trays through narrow halls. Willow stood glowing in her gown, ready to walk into her new life. And I, standing in the middle of it all, couldn't silence the echo of Victoria's whisper. Stolen daughter, Emma. Every glance from my parents felt sharper, heavier. Their smiles looked painted on. Their affection tasted bittersweet. And though I forced myself to study Willow, inside I was unraveling thread by thread, pulled toward a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to discover. By the time the guests began arriving, my nerves were already frayed. I had spent the entire morning suppressing the memory of Victoria Caldwell's nails digging into my wrist, but she didn't let me forget. Everywhere I turned, she was there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the idle curiosity of an in-law scanning the room for gossip. It was something deeper, something desperate. The first time she approached me, I was arranging place cards in the reception hall. Her perfume drifted in before her words. She stepped close, too close, and studied my face like a painting. She murmured that I looked familiar, her tone sharp despite the polite words. I tried to remind her that we'd met at the engagement party, but her eyes didn't waver. She lingered on my features, tilting her head as though she were matching me against an image only she could see. I excused myself, chalking her behavior up to nerves or too much wine before noon. But 20 minutes later, she cornered me again near the altar. She spoke my name slowly, tasting each syllable like it was proof of something. Was it a family name, she asked. My voice stayed light, but unease prickled the back of my neck. When I answered that my mother had simply liked the sound of it, her eyes narrowed, calculating. I slipped away, but my pulse raced. Her third approach happened in the kitchen corridor. She asked me where I grew up, which hospital I'd been born in. The questions landed like darts, oddly specific and disturbingly personal. I laughed them off, telling her I didn't know. But when she saw the edge of my dress slip, revealing the birthmark I had carried all my life, her face went pale. For an instant, I thought she might collapse. She grabbed my arm, whispered not to tell Mason anything, then fled down the hall like a woman possessed. I wanted to believe she was unstable, grief-twisted after too many years clinging to hope. I even pulled Brady, my cousin, aside to ask him to keep an eye on her. He only deepened my unease by telling me she had grilled him about my family. When he'd met me, how long he'd known me, if he remembered my early childhood. He'd told her the truth, that I hadn't entered his life until after our family moved from Milwaukee when I was 2. Milwaukee. A city I had no memory of, except as the place we'd supposedly left behind when Dad got a new job in Chicago. The 4th time she approached, there was no pretense left. Minutes before the ceremony, when I was straightening Willow's veil, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expensive makeup streaked by tears. She asked for me alone, her voice shaking with urgency. Against my better judgment, I followed her into an empty side room. There, she pressed a worn photograph into my hands. The baby in the picture had wispy brown hair, round cheeks, and eyes the same unusual green I saw in my own reflection. And on her tiny collarbone, there it was, the same crescent-shaped birthmark that had always set me apart. Her voice trembled as she told me the child's name. Emma. 14 months old when she vanished from a grocery store in Milwaukee. The date lined up with the year of my birth. She said she and her husband were both AB positive, that it was impossible for them to have produced a child with my O-negative blood type. Yet Emma would have been O-negative. Her eyes burned with certainty, with a hope that scared me more than her grief. I tried to tell her she was wrong. I tried to hold on to the identity I had lived with all my life, my name, my parents, my memories. But her words hooked into me like barbs, and suddenly every gap I'd overlooked, no baby photos before age 2, never having seen my birth certificate, my parents' odd tension this week, slammed into me with cruel clarity. I shoved the photo back at her, my hands shaking. I told her my sister was getting married, that I couldn't deal with this now. She said she had waited 28 years, that she could wait a few more hours, but begged me to agree to a DNA test afterward. I stumbled back to Willow's side, her bouquet trembling in my grip. She asked if I was okay, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I lied, forcing a smile that felt carved from stone. The ceremony began, vows and music blurring together. Yet no matter how brightly the afternoon shone, I felt myself splitting. Part of me stood at the altar with my sister. The other part stared at a photograph of a baby with my eyes and my birthmark, wondering if I had just seen myself. The ceremony drifted by in fragments, like a dream where you keep forgetting what you're supposed to do. I held Willow's bouquet, smiled for the guests, and nodded at the right times, but none of it reached me. My gaze kept darting to my parents in the front row. Mom dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Dad squeezed her hand. On the surface, they looked like any proud parents at their youngest daughter's wedding. But now I saw something else. Strain. Fear. Their smiles stretched too thin, their eyes searching mine like they were silently confessing before words even left their lips. When Mason kissed Willow and the applause filled the room, I knew I couldn't last until the reception. The truth had dug too deep. I slipped away during cocktail hour, my heart hammering, and found my cousin Brady near the bar. Brady was the kind of person who knew how to get information. He worked in law enforcement, and he had a way of making calls others couldn't. I asked him to check the name Victoria had given me. Emma Caldwell. Milwaukee. Kidnapped 1997. He hesitated, but the urgency in my voice pushed him to nod. He told me to give him 20 minutes. While Brady made his calls, I sought out my parents in the garden. They were smiling for photographs, Diane's pearls glinting in the sunlight. I waited until the photographer left, then walked straight to them. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, where I'd quickly snapped a picture of the photograph Victoria had shown me. I held the screen in front of them. She says this baby is me. Dad's face drained of color so fast I thought he might collapse. Mom's hand flew to her pearls, her lips parting but no sound coming out. I demanded answers. What hospital had I been born in? Who had delivered me? Why there were no pictures of me before age 2? The silence that followed was louder than any denial. Finally, Dad's voice cracked the air, soft and breaking. We loved you the moment we saw you. Those weren't the words of innocence. They were words of people who knew the truth had finally arrived. I felt rage rise like fire in my chest. 28 years, and they had never told me. 28 years of secrets carefully hidden under the disguise of love. I pushed them to explain. They begged to go somewhere private, but I refused. No more hiding, no more whispered lies behind closed doors. And then the story poured out, jagged and raw. Mom had been working at a women's shelter in Milwaukee after years of miscarriages. One night, a young woman strung out and desperate came in during a storm, leaving behind a toddler. The woman never came back. For 3 days, no one claimed the baby. They convinced themselves she'd been abandoned. Then the news report came. The Caldwell baby, stolen from a grocery store, vanished without a trace. Same age, same birthmark. Dad said they panicked. Mom admitted she couldn't bear the thought of giving me back, not after I'd started calling her mama. They told themselves they were saving me. They told themselves it was fate, a miracle after so much pain. So they packed up, moved to Chicago, and gave me a new name, a new life. As their words spilled out, my heart cracked. Every memory I had with them, my first bike ride, bedtime stories, laughter around the dinner table, was now wrapped in deception. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, reality unmoored. Brady returned, his face pale, holding his phone. He had found the case file. Emma Caldwell, October 15th, 1997. Taken from Brennan's grocery store. The details matched. The woman seen in the footage, Melissa Vaughn, was found dead from an overdose 2 weeks later. The baby had never been found. Until now. My parents sat slumped on a stone bench, small and broken in their guilt. They begged me to understand, to see the love they'd given me, to forgive the choices they made, but all I could see was the Caldwell family, parents begging on TV for their missing baby, while mine stood silent in a living room hundreds of miles away. And I was left standing in the wreckage of 2 families torn apart, one by loss, the other by lies. The air in the garden had gone still, heavy with the weight of everything my parents had confessed. Around us, the wedding carried on. Guests clinking glasses, photographers corralling bridesmaids, children chasing each other on the lawn. Yet I stood in a private storm, thunder pounding inside me while the world remained oblivious. I demanded to know how they could live with themselves, how they could tuck me into bed at night, knowing another family cried themselves to sleep without me. Mom's tears smeared her mascara into dark rivers as she tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow. Dad insisted they had meant to go through proper channels at first, that they were only trying to protect me from abandonment. Protect me. That word felt like acid. They hadn't protected me. They had stolen me, renamed me, built my entire life on a lie. The sound of footsteps broke through my fury. Victoria Caldwell was approaching across the lawn, her husband just behind her. Willow appeared from the opposite side, her gown glowing in the late sun, Mason at her arm. The perfect picture of a bride who had no idea her wedding day was collapsing into scandal. My throat clenched, but the truth had already burned its way out. When Willow asked what was happening, why Mom looked shattered, I couldn't hold it in. Because 28 years ago, they stole a baby. And that baby was me. The words landed like shrapnel, scattering through the garden, splintering every bond I thought unbreakable. Willow's face went pale. My parents broke down, pleading for me to listen. Victoria staggered toward me, whispering Emma like a prayer. The weeks that followed blurred into paperwork, courtrooms, and sterile hospital labs. DNA confirmed what my blood already knew. I was Emma Caldwell. The missing toddler plastered on news broadcasts in 1997, the baby who never came home. My birthday wasn't June 15th but October 3rd. The truth carved out everything I thought I was. Frank and Diane Morrison faced charges: kidnapping, fraud, falsifying documents. Their lawyers argued context, their intentions, their years of parenting. The judge weighed compassion against crime. In the end, they were sentenced to probation and thousands of hours of community service instead of prison. Watching them stand in the courtroom, shrunken and ashamed, I felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just emptiness. Meanwhile, the Caldwells surged into my life with overwhelming force. Victoria wanted lunches, coffee dates, long conversations to fill decades of absence. She sent me photos of a father I'd never meet, of grandparents who had died waiting for answers. She told me they had kept a bedroom ready for me, untouched for years, until hope itself felt cruel. Every new piece of history she handed me was both a gift and a wound. But with every revelation, the anger I carried only grew. My identity had split in two. Harper, the daughter raised in stolen love. Emma, the daughter ripped away and grieved. How could both be me? My parents' lies and Victoria's grief collided inside me like colliding waves, each one pulling me under. Therapy became my only lifeline. My therapist asked if I blamed myself. I hadn't even realized until then that I did. Somewhere in my heart, I carried guilt for being the reason two families had been torn apart. Guilt for being loved by one while lost to the other. She told me it wasn't my fault, but that didn't stop the weight from pressing down. The hardest part wasn't court or the tests. It was facing Willow. She called and texted constantly after the wedding, her messages small lifelines tossed across the gulf between us. I ignored them at first, unsure how to answer. Every time I thought of her, my chest ached with grief. Was she still my sister if our blood said otherwise? Could we rebuild what had been built on a lie? I didn't know then. All I knew was that truth had razed my world to the ground. And I was left standing in the ruins, unsure if anything could be rebuilt. Meeting the Caldwells as my family was like stepping into a mirror world. Everything familiar in outline, yet foreign in detail. Victoria insisted on introducing me not as Harper, but as Emma, her lost daughter. The name fit and didn't fit, like a coat borrowed from someone taller. She pressed photographs into my hands. Birthdays I wasn't at, holidays with an empty chair at the table, her husband Thomas smiling beside her before a heart attack claimed him 5 years ago. She told me he had died never knowing if his daughter was alive. The grief in her eyes when she said it was almost unbearable. Their home was immaculate but frozen in time. A bedroom decorated in pastel colors had been preserved for me, Emma, exactly as it was in 1997. Toys untouched, books stacked neatly on shelves, a crib-turned bed waiting for a toddler who never came home. Walking into that room, my stomach twisted. I had never been there, but I could feel the weight of absence pressed into the wallpaper, a shrine to a child who had grown up elsewhere. Victoria hovered constantly. She texted me every morning, called every night, desperate to compress 28 years of missed love into each conversation. She told me about the cousins I never knew, the family traditions I had missed, the inside jokes that didn't include me. Her love was suffocating, but I couldn't resent her for it. She had been robbed of me, and now she was clinging as though I might vanish again. And yet, I wasn't only Emma. I couldn't erase Harper, the girl who had built forts with Willow, who had grown up in Chicago parks, who had been loved fiercely by parents who weren't really hers. Every time I saw Victoria's joy, I felt guilt for missing the Morrisons. Every time I remembered the Morrisons' betrayals, I hated myself for missing their voices. Love felt like a trap either way. The hardest blow came in fragments. Victoria showed me photo albums of Thomas, my biological father. His smile resembled mine. His eyes mirrored the same strange green shade that had unsettled her the first day she saw me. He had never stopped believing I was alive. He had waited for me, dreamed of finding me, and died with that hope unanswered. I stared at his face, grief blooming for a man I had never known but somehow longed for. Family dinners with the Caldwells were overwhelming. They wanted me to sit at the head of the table to be the center of attention. They asked me about my childhood as Harper, about the people who raised me, about the years they had lost. Sometimes their questions were gentle, other times they carried an edge, as if my answers might confirm or erase the legitimacy of my stolen years. I told them what I could, but every story felt like betrayal. Betrayal to them, betrayal to the Morrisons, betrayal to myself. At night, I lay awake in my apartment with two names circling in my head. Harper. Emma. Which one belonged to me? Could both coexist without tearing me apart? Therapy sessions circled these questions endlessly, but no answer satisfied me. My therapist said identity could be layered, that I didn't have to choose. But when my phone buzzed with text from both Victoria and Willow, I felt like I was splitting down the middle, torn between two families who each claimed me as theirs. The grief I felt for my biological father surprised me most. I had never met him, but I mourned him as though we'd been close. I imagined him teaching me how to ride a bike, cheering at my school plays, walking me down the aisle someday. All the things Frank Morrison had done in his place. I realized then that grief wasn't about the time you shared, it was about the time stolen. Victoria's love became a constant presence, but it was Willow's silence that haunted me. I hadn't yet faced her, hadn't yet answered her calls. The idea of looking at her, of seeing my sister who technically wasn't my sister, left me hollow. How could I stand before her when everything between us felt like it had been rewritten? And still, beneath all the confusion, I longed for her. For the one person who had always been my anchor. The thought of her waiting, hurting, while I disappeared into this fractured identity, carved at me until I could hardly breathe. 3 months passed before I finally opened my door to Willow. She stood in the hallway of my apartment building, with takeout bags dangling from her hands, and her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady, the kind of look she wore when she had already cried out her fear and decided to fight anyway. She didn't wait for an invitation. She slipped inside, dropped cartons of Chinese food on my coffee table, and told me she wasn't leaving until we talked. I wanted to be angry with her. I wanted to push her away like I had pushed away everyone these past weeks, cocooning myself in silence and confusion. But the smell of sesame chicken and lo mein filled the room, and her presence, loud, stubborn, unshakable, was a reminder of everything we had always been to each other. My chest tightened. I hadn't realized how much I had missed her until she was standing there. We ate in near silence at first, the clink of chopsticks and the rustle of paper containers filling the space between us. Finally, she spoke. She told me she understood why I hadn't answered her calls, why I had needed time, but she said she needed me to understand something too. I was her sister. Full stop. Not in quotation marks, not with an asterisk. Sister. Her words cracked something open inside me. For weeks I had drowned in questions of biology, legality, betrayal. Yet Willow spoke of scraped knees, pillow forts, whispered secrets in the dark. She reminded me of the nights I had held her hair back when she was sick, the mornings I had defended her when bullies laughed. She reminded me of the bond we had built, a bond that no DNA test could erase. I broke then. All the anger I had carried against the Morrisons, all the confusion from the Caldwells' desperate love, poured out of me in tears I couldn't stop. Willow pulled me against her, just like when we were little, rocking me while I sobbed. She whispered that none of it was fake, that our history was real, our love was real, and nothing anyone could reveal would take that away. It was the first time since the wedding that I felt the possibility of wholeness. The first time I thought maybe I didn't have to choose between Harper and Emma. Maybe I could be both, because she saw me as both, and still loved me without hesitation. From that day forward, she refused to let me drift. She texted me daily, invited me to lunches, pulled me into her new life with Mason as though nothing had changed. At first, I resisted. I worried about betraying Victoria by clinging too tightly to Willow. I worried about betraying Willow by giving Victoria space in my life. But Willow reminded me again and again that love wasn't pie. It wasn't diminished by sharing. When I finally met her for coffee one morning, she pushed a photo across the table. The two of us at age 7 and 9, faces smeared with ice cream, grins wide and unguarded. "This is what matters," she said. And she was right. That photograph wasn't stolen. That moment wasn't fake. It belonged to us. Still, guilt clung to me. I couldn't shake the image of Victoria blowing out candles alone each October, celebrating a birthday I had never known was mine. I couldn't silence the memory of my parents, Frank and Diane, looking small in the courtroom as the judge sentenced them to probation. Love felt fractured, sharp-edged, impossible to hold without bleeding. But Willow held me steady. She reminded me that being torn didn't mean I had to break. She told me that sometimes family wasn't about choosing. It was about accepting the chaos, the contradictions, the love and the hurt together. For the first time, I began to believe her. Life did not snap neatly back into place. It shifted, bent, and stretched in uncomfortable ways, forcing me to live in the liminal space between two families who both claimed me. Some days I felt like a bridge, other days like a fracture line. Therapy became my compass, guiding me through the impossible terrain of forgiveness, anger, and love. Victoria texted too much, called often, and sent me recipes she swore I loved as a toddler, though I had no memory of them. I visited her regularly, joining the Caldwells for Sunday dinners, Meeting cousins who embraced me like a miracle returned. Their love was overwhelming, sometimes smothering, but it was real. They had grieved me for 28 years, and now that I was here, they refused to waste another moment. I learned about traditions I'd missed: an annual 4th of July picnic, Christmas Eve caroling, birthday celebrations for a daughter who never showed up to blow out the candles. I carried their love like a gift and a weight. At the same time, I couldn't erase Frank and Diane. Letters from them piled on my kitchen table for months before I gathered the courage to read them. Each one was an apology wrapped in memory. Stories of late-night fevers, scraped knees, handmade Halloween costumes. They admitted their crime, their selfishness, their fear, but they begged me to remember the years of love threaded through the lie. I wanted to burn the letters. I wanted to hold them close. In the end, I did both, crying as I read every word. Forgiveness did not arrive in a sweeping moment of grace. It came slowly, unevenly, in fragments. I forgave them for the nights they soothed me when I woke screaming, but not for the years they watched the Caldwells plead on television. I forgave them for raising me with tenderness, but not for hiding me with silence. Therapy taught me I didn't have to forgive all at once or even completely. I only had to keep walking toward it, one step at a time. Through it all, Willow remained my anchor. She and Mason welcomed me into their married life, pulling out an extra chair at every table, reminding me that I belonged. She told me over and over that blood did not dictate bond, that our history could not be erased. With her, I felt solid again, less like a fractured identity and more like someone learning to carry two truths at once. Eventually, I stopped trying to choose between Harper and Emma. I became both. On legal documents, I signed my name as Harper Emma Morrison Caldwell. To Victoria, I was Emma. To Willow, I would always be Harper. And to myself, I was learning to be the sum of both lives, the girl raised in a lie and the woman rediscovering her truth. Love revealed itself as something far messier than I had ever believed. It was selfish and selfless, broken and healing, painful and sustaining. It lived in the lies my parents told to keep me, in the grief Victoria carried to find me, in the loyalty Willow gave me without conditions. It was not perfect, but it was real. I understood then that family is not a single thread, but a tapestry, woven with contradictions, tangled with mistakes, threaded with both loss and joy. And somehow, I had been given two. The story of my life did not end with a single revelation, but with the slow, uneven weaving of two truths that could never quite fit together, yet refused to let go of one another. For months, I lived as if between worlds. One family had raised me, loved me, and built my childhood on stolen ground. Another had lost me, searched for me, and welcomed me back as if time had not carved nearly 3 decades between us. What I came to understand was that truth does not neatly resolve. It lingers, it unsettles, and it reshapes everything in its path. There were days I woke in the middle of the night, aching for the sound of my mother, Diane, humming while she cooked, even as I hated the silence she had maintained about my past. There were mornings when I felt a surge of gratitude for Victoria's relentless devotion, even as I flinched at her intensity, her need to compress lost years into every embrace. Grief became a constant companion. Grief for the father I would never meet, for the years I could not return, for the pieces of myself that no longer aligned. Yet, alongside grief came love, not simple or pure, but jagged and real. Love in Willow's unwavering loyalty, her insistence that I was her sister regardless of blood. Love in the Morrisons' flawed devotion, even when it had grown from lies. Love in the Caldwells' endless hope, their belief that finding me had finally closed a wound left open too long. I learned that forgiveness is not a single act but a practice, something you offer in fragments when you are able, something you hold back when you are not. I do not forgive completely, not yet, perhaps not ever. But I carry both families forward because they are mine, not by choice, but by circumstance and survival. In the end, I chose to keep every name, Harper Emma Morrison Caldwell, not as a compromise, but as a declaration. I am not one or the other. I am all of it. The girl who was stolen, the woman who was raised, the sister who stayed, the daughter who was found. What remains now is not clarity, but acceptance. Life is complicated, family is imperfect, and love is rarely clean. Yet it is still love that carries us through. Love that binds even when truth threatens to tear everything apart. I have learned to live not in the shadow of what was stolen, but in the light of what was given back, however broken, however incomplete. And so my story softens into this. I have two mothers who love me in different, flawed ways. I have one sister who has never let go, and I have myself, whole not because I was healed, but because I chose to stay space between, claiming every part of who I am.